The desert wind carried nothing but dust and disappointment across the New Mexico territory that June of 1886. Thomas Granger stood on the porch of his ranch house, watching the sun bleed orange across the horizon, painting the barren landscape in shades of rust and gold. At 28, he owned more land than most men could dream of, 3,000 acres of scrubland that he'd turned profitable through sheer determination, and cattle that could survive on thorns and prayers. "You're wool gathering again." Emily Carter's voice drifted from behind him, soft but edged with the particular sharpness of a woman who knew she wasn't being truly seen. She stepped onto the porch, her blue taffeta dress rustling like whispered complaints against the rough wooden boards. Even here, 40 miles from the nearest proper town, she insisted on dressing as if she might receive callers from Boston at any moment. Thomas turned, forcing his mouth into the shape of a smile. "Just watching the herd come in. Lost 2 more to the drought. Father says the railroad will solve everything," Emily replied, moving to stand beside him but careful not to let the dust touch her hem. "Once it comes through, we can ship water in, ship everything in, make this place civilized." The word civilized sat heavy in Thomas's chest. Mayor William Carter's daughter had been speaking of civilization since the day Thomas had proposed, or rather, since the day her father had suggested the match and Thomas had seen no good reason to refuse. The marriage would unite the largest ranch with the most powerful political family in the county. It was good business. Sound logic. Everything a man should want. "The Hendersons will arrive tomorrow for dinner," Emily continued, her fingers adjusting the cameo at her throat. "Mother sent her best china. We'll need to have Maria polish the silver twice. I won't have anyone saying we live like savages out here." Thomas nodded absently. Maria, their Mexican housekeeper, had already polished everything until it gleamed like fool's gold. But Emily would have her polish it again, and again, until the very air in the house felt scrubbed raw of anything real or natural. "Thomas," Emily's hand touched his arm, light as a moth. "You haven't heard a word I've said." "I heard the Hendersons. Silver. I'll make sure everything's ready." She studied his face with those pale blue eyes that reminded him of winter sky, beautiful but cold. 3 more months, she said quietly. "Then we'll be married, and you won't have to stand out here alone anymore." The promise in her words felt like a door closing. Thomas covered her hand with his, feeling the soft skin that had never known a day's real work. "You should go inside. The dust isn't good for you." After she left, trailing French perfume and unspoken reproaches, Thomas remained on the porch. The cattle were settling for the night, their lowing carried on the wind like ancient songs. Somewhere out there, coyotes were beginning their evening hunt. The world was turning wild and dark, and he was about to cage himself in matrimony and silver polish. His foreman, Jake Morrison, rode up as the last light faded, a grizzled man of 45 who'd been with Thomas since the beginning. Jake had the gift of saying much with few words. "Rough day?" Jake asked, dismounting with the careful movements of a man whose bones remembered every fall. "Emily's planning the wedding." Thomas tried to make it sound like good news. Jake spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Mayor's girl sure likes her plans." He paused, then added, "You heading to town tonight?" "No, why?" "Full moon coming up. Good night for checking the south pasture. That creek's been acting peculiar, sometimes water, sometimes not. Might be worth a look." Thomas heard what Jake wasn't saying. The foreman knew him well enough to recognize when he needed to ride, needed to put distance between himself and the weight of expectations. "I'll take Bourbon," Thomas said, referring to his favorite horse. "Check it myself." Jake nodded and headed to the bunkhouse without another word. That was what Thomas appreciated about the man. He understood the value of silence. An hour later, Thomas rode out under a moon so bright it turned the desert silver. Bourbon moved with sure feet along paths they both knew by heart. The night air was still warm but bearable, carrying the scent of sage and creosote. Out here, with no one watching, Thomas could drop the mask of the successful rancher, the suitable fiancé, the man who had everything figured out, The truth was simpler and more shameful. He felt nothing. Oh, he cared for Emily in the way one might care for a piece of fine furniture. She was lovely, well-made, appropriate for his station. But when he looked at her, when he touched her hand, there was only emptiness, a hollowness that seemed to grow larger each day, like the desert swallowing rain. His mother, God rest her soul, had loved his father with a fierce, burning love that had carried them through drought, Apache raids, and the 1,000 hardships of frontier life. Thomas had seen it in her eyes every morning until the fever took her. That kind of love seemed as remote to him now as the stars overhead, beautiful to contemplate, but impossible to touch. The south pasture spread before him, bathed in moonlight. The creek Jake had mentioned was indeed acting strange. A trickle of water appeared and disappeared among the rocks like a shy spirit. Thomas dismounted to investigate, letting Bourbon drink what little water pooled in the shallow places. It was then he heard it, a sound so unexpected it made him freeze. Music. No, not music exactly. A rhythm. Someone was moving, dancing perhaps, somewhere beyond the next rise. Thomas left Bourbon ground-tied and moved forward on foot, every instinct alert. It could be travelers, could be trouble. In this territory, a man learned to approach the unknown with caution. He crept up the small hill, using the scattered juniper for cover. What he saw on the other side stopped his breath. A woman was dancing alone beside the creek bed. But this was no ordinary dance. She moved with a fluid grace that seemed to pull the moonlight down into her very skin. Her hair, black as the spaces between stars, flowed loose down her back. She wore a simple doe-skin dress that moved with her body as if it were made of water itself. Her feet were bare, creating small clouds of silver dust that hung in the air like incense. She was Apache. That much was clear from her dress, from the way she moved, from something indefinable that spoke of older ways and deeper connections to this land. Her arms traced patterns in the air that seemed to tell stories Thomas couldn't read, her body swaying to music only she could hear. Thomas knew he should leave. A white man watching an Apache woman alone at night. Nothing good could come of it, but he found himself unable to move, transfixed by the raw beauty of what he witnessed. This wasn't the practice steps of a town social or the rigid quadrilles Emily favored. This was something primal, honest, real in a way that made his chest ache with unnamed longing. The woman turned in her dance, and moonlight illuminated her face. She was young, perhaps 25, with high cheekbones and a mouth set in lines of sorrow, even as her body celebrated some private joy. Her eyes were closed, her expression transported to somewhere beyond this dry creek and lonely desert. Thomas must have made some sound, a shifted weight, a caught breath, because suddenly her eyes snapped open, for one eternal moment. Their gazes locked across the distance. Her eyes were dark as deep water, holding depths of pain and pride that made Thomas's neat, organized life seem suddenly shabby and false. Then, like a deer sensing danger, she was gone. One moment there, the next vanished into the shadows of the desert night. Thomas remained frozen, heart hammering, watching the empty space where she had been. The dust she'd stirred still hung in the air, the only proof he hadn't dreamed it all. He stood there for a long time, waiting to see if she would return, knowing she wouldn't. Finally, he made his way back to Bourbon, his legs unsteady as a new colt's. The ride home seemed both endless and too quick. The ranch house loomed before him, windows glowing with lamplight, looking like a prison he'd built himself. Inside, Emily would be writing letters on her imported stationery, planning their future in her neat copperplate hand. The silver would be gleaming. Everything would be in its proper place. Thomas unsaddled Bourbon and turned him out to pasture. He stood in the barn for a moment, breathing in the familiar scents of hay and horse and leather. But now they couldn't mask the memory of sage and woman and wild freedom dancing in the moonlight. He entered the house quietly, hoping to avoid conversation. But Emily was waiting in the parlor, her needlework in her lap. "You were gone a long time," she said without looking up. "Did you find what you were looking for?" The question was innocent, but Thomas felt it pierce him like an accusation. "The creek's running low. We might need to move some cattle. Father says once we're married, you should think about selling. Move to town. Let someone else worry about cattle and drought." Thomas said nothing. In his mind, he could still see the Apache woman dancing, could still feel the way his heart had stopped when their eyes met. He had the sudden, terrible certainty that he'd been asleep his whole life until this moment, and now that he was awake, he didn't know how to close his eyes again. "I'm tired," he said finally. "Long day tomorrow." Emily nodded, accepting the dismissal with her usual cool grace. "Of course. Sleep well, Thomas." But Thomas didn't sleep. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, seeing shadows dance in the moonlight, somewhere out there in the desert. A woman danced alone with her grief and her gods, and Thomas Granger, successful rancher, respected citizen, engaged man, felt the first crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. He didn't know her name, didn't know if he'd ever see her again, but he knew with a certainty that scared him that the neat, planned life stretching before him had just become unbearable. The moon traced its path across his window, and Thomas watched it with the eyes of a man who'd glimpsed freedom and found himself a prisoner. The desert wind whispered against the walls of his substantial house, carrying secrets and promises and the faint echo of a dance that had changed everything. The days that followed passed like fever dreams. Thomas went through the motions of ranch life, checking cattle, mending fences, reviewing accounts, but his mind remained fixed on that moonlit dance. He found himself inventing reasons to ride south, always hoping for another glimpse, always returning disappointed. It was Jake who finally gave him the information he craved, though the foreman didn't know it. "Heard something in town you might want to know," Jake said one morning, rolling a cigarette with practiced ease. "That Apache widow's been coming to Muller's trading post, brings herbs and such. Trades for supplies." Thomas kept his voice carefully neutral. "Apache widow?" "The one lives out in Skeleton Canyon. Her man was killed in that skirmish 2 winters back, when the cavalry came through. Folks say she's touched in the head, living alone like that. Most of the Apache moved on to the reservation, but she stayed." Jake lit his cigarette, squinting through the smoke. "Muller says she's harmless enough, knows healing. Apparently, fixed up the Hendricks boy when he got snake-bit last spring." Thomas filed away every word like a man hoarding water in the desert. Skeleton Canyon, a widow, a healer. It wasn't much, but it was more than the nothing he'd had before. "When does she usually come to town?" Thomas asked, examining a bridle with feigned interest. Jake gave him a sharp look. "Wednesdays. Mostly early morning, before the heat." He paused, then added quietly, "Thomas, that's not a road you want to ride down." But Thomas was already making plans. Wednesday was 3 days away. He'd need a reason to be at Muller's trading post, something that wouldn't raise questions. When Wednesday came, Thomas found himself at Muller's before dawn, claiming he needed special supplies for treating hoof rot in the cattle. Otto Muller, a German immigrant with arms like ham hocks and a temper to match, grumbled about the early hour but opened his store. "You wait," Muller said in his thick accent. "I must go to back room for what you need." Thomas positioned himself near the window, watching the road. The sun was just beginning to paint the mountains pink when he saw her. She moved like smoke through the morning shadows, a burden basket on her back, her steps silent on the dusty street. She wore the same doe-skin dress, but in daylight he could see it was worn, carefully mended in places. Her hair was braided now, wrapped in the traditional way. She looked neither left nor right, ignoring the few early risers who pointedly crossed to the other side of the street. When she entered the store, her eyes went immediately to Thomas. Recognition flashed across her face, followed quickly by wariness. Up close, he could see what the moonlight had hidden, the fine lines of hardship around her eyes, the defensive set of her shoulders, the way she positioned herself near the door like an animal ready to bolt. "Morning," Thomas said, his voice coming out rougher than intended. She nodded once, a movement so small he might have imagined it, then turned to the counter. Muller emerged from the back room. his expression souring when he saw her. "You got medicine?" he asked brusquely. "The bundles, like before." She placed several cloth-wrapped packages on the counter. The smell of sage and other herbs Thomas couldn't identify filled the small space. Muller examined each bundle with suspicious care, though Thomas suspected he knew nothing about what he was looking at. "Same as always," Muller finally said. 2 pounds salt, 1 pound coffee, box of ammunition, and sugar," she said. Her voice was low, accented but clear. "You promised sugar last time." "Sugar's gone up. These herbs not worth so much now." Thomas saw her jaw tighten, but she said nothing. Before he could think better of it, Thomas spoke up. "Add 5 pounds of sugar to my order, auto, and throw in some of that cloth you got from Santa Fe, the blue stuff." Muller's eyes narrowed. "That's expensive goods. Granger, I'm good for it." Thomas kept his eyes on Muller, not trusting himself to look at the woman. He could feel her stillness, like a held breath. Muller shrugged and added the items to Thomas's pile. When he'd gone to fetch the cloth, Thomas finally glanced at the woman. She was studying him with those dark eyes, her expression unreadable. "I don't need charity," she said quietly. "It's not charity. It's an apology. For intruding the other night, I shouldn't have watched." Something shifted in her face. "You are the rancher, the one who will marry the mayor's daughter." It wasn't a question. Thomas felt heat rise in his neck. News travels, I guess. Everything travels in the desert, even things that should stay buried. She gathered her supplies. Muller, having returned with the cloth, "Thank you for the sugar. My name is Ayanna." "Thomas Granger," he said, though she clearly already knew. She moved toward the door, then paused. "Do not come to the canyon. Thomas Granger. There is nothing there for you but sorrow." Then she was gone, leaving Thomas standing in the trading post with his unnecessary supplies and a name that tasted like honey on his tongue. Ayanna. Muller was watching him with knowing eyes. "You be careful, boy. That one. She carries death with her. Her husband, he was war chief, killed many whites before the soldiers got him. She don't forget." But Thomas was already lost. He gathered his purchases and left, his mind spinning with the brief encounter. Her voice stayed with him through the long ride home, that mixture of pride and pain, strength and vulnerability. Emily noticed his distraction immediately. "You're wool gathering again," she said over dinner. "Mother wants to know about flowers for the wedding. Do you have a preference?" "Whatever you think best." Thomas replied automatically. Emily set down her fork with a sharp click. "Thomas, we need to discuss this. The wedding is in 2 months. The entire county will be there. Father's invited the territorial governor." The walls seemed to close in around him. "I know. I'm sorry. There's just been a lot on my mind with the ranch. Once we're married, you won't have to worry so much about such things." Emily's voice held that tone of patient reasonableness that made him feel like a child. "Father has plans. Big plans. You could be mayor yourself one day, perhaps even governor." Thomas looked at her across the table. This beautiful, accomplished woman who represented everything a man should want. She would make a perfect political wife. She would host parties and manage households and never, ever dance alone in the moonlight. "I need some air," he said, pushing back from the table. Emily's face showed hurt for just a moment before smoothing back into its usual composure. "Of course, I'll have Maria save your dessert." Outside, the night was clear and growing cool. Thomas walked to the corral where Bourbon nickered a greeting. He stood there, one hand on the horse's neck, trying to make sense of the turmoil in his chest. A week passed, then 2. Thomas threw himself into ranch work with desperate energy, trying to exhaust himself into forgetting. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ayanna dancing, saw her proud face in Muller's store, heard her warning about sorrow. It was the snake bite that finally gave him an excuse. One of his newer hands, a boy named Samuel, got careless fixing fence and disturbed a rattler. By the time they got him back to the ranch, his arm was swollen and the boy was delirious with fever. "We need to get him to town," Jake said, but Thomas could see the doubt in his foreman's eyes. Town was hours away. The boy might not make it. "There's someone closer," Thomas said quietly. "The Apache woman, the healer." Jake's face went still. "Thomas, she saved the Hendricks boy. You said so yourself." Thomas was already heading for the horses. "I'm going. Keep him as comfortable as you can." He rode hard for Skeleton Canyon, pushing Bourbon to his limits. The canyon was a slash of red rock and shadow, known as a hideout for outlaws and a place where Apache ghosts were said to walk. Thomas had never ventured there before, but desperation made him bold. He found her camp by the smoke of her fire, a traditional wickiup shelter built against a rock overhang, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. She emerged before he could call out, a rifle in her hands. "I told you not to come," she said. "My man is dying. Snakebite. Please." She studied him for a long moment, then lowered the rifle. "Bring him." Thomas rode back even harder. Jake, following with Samuel, draped over a horse. By the time they returned, the sun was setting, painting the canyon walls in shades of blood. Ayanna took one look at the boy and began issuing orders. "Build up the fire. Boil water. Hold him still." She worked with swift efficiency, cutting away the affected tissue, applying poultices that smelled sharp and green. She sang as she worked, low chants in Apache that seemed to calm the delirious boy. Thomas watched her hands, sure, gentle, skilled, and felt something shift in his chest. Through the night she worked, Thomas and Jake taking turns holding Samuel still. By dawn, the boy's fever had broken. His breathing was easier. He would live. "How much do we owe you?" Thomas asked as Jake prepared to take Samuel back to the ranch. Ayanna was washing her hands in a basin, her movements tired but graceful. "Nothing. The boy owes his life to the spirits, not to me." Jake left with Samuel, promising to send supplies in payment despite her refusal. Thomas knew he should go too, but found himself lingering. "Why do you stay here?" he asked. "Why not go to the reservation with the others?" Her face hardened. "This is my husband's land. He is buried here. I will not leave him to lie alone among enemies. The war is over." "Is it?" She looked at him directly then, and he saw the depths of loss in her eyes. "Your war may be over. Thomas Granger, mine continues every day." Thomas thought of his comfortable life, his profitable ranch built on land that had once belonged to people like her. The weight of it sat heavy on his shoulders. "I'm sorry," he said, knowing how inadequate the words were. "Sorrow changes nothing." She turned away, busying herself with storing her medicine bundles. "You should go. Your woman will wonder where you are." "She's not my—" Thomas stopped. What was Emily if not his woman, his fiancée, his future wife, his path to respectability and power? "It's complicated." Ayanna made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Life is simple. We make it complicated." She faced him again. "You are a good man. I think, but goodness is not enough. Go back to your world. Thomas Granger. Marry your pale woman. Have pale children. Forget you ever saw an Apache widow dance." But Thomas knew, even as he mounted Bourbon and rode away, that forgetting was the one thing he could never do. Her face, her voice, her proud sorrow, they were carved into his soul now, as permanent as the ancient drawings on the canyon walls. At the ranch, Emily was waiting on the porch, still in her traveling clothes. "I came as soon as I heard about Samuel." She said, "Is he? He'll live. The healing woman saved him." Emily's face pinched with distaste. "The Apache. Thomas, you can't be associating with such people. What will everyone think?" "I think they'll be glad Samuel is alive," Thomas said, too tired for patience. "That's not what I mean, and you know it." Emily followed him into the house. "Thomas, we need to talk about what's happening here. You've been distant for weeks. You disappear for hours. And now this." Thomas poured himself a whiskey, his hands shaking slightly. "Now what? Now you're running to savages for help instead of proper doctors." "Thomas, I'm trying to understand, but you're making it very difficult." The word savages ignited something in Thomas's chest. She saved a man's life. Emily. That boy would be dead without her. That's not the point. Then what is the point? Thomas set down his glass harder than necessary. Tell me, Emily, what exactly is the point of all this? The wedding plans, the governor's visit, your father's ambitions. What's the point of any of it? Emily stepped back as if he'd slapped her. The point is our future, our life together. Everything we've planned. Everything you've planned. You and your father. Is that what this is about? You feel trapped? Emily's voice rose. Thomas, every man feels this way before his wedding. It's natural, but you can't just what? Can't just realize I feel nothing? Can't just admit that when I look at our future, all I see is emptiness? The words hung in the air between them like struck bells. Emily's face went white, then red, then white again. You don't mean that, she whispered. Thomas wanted to take it back, to retreat into the safety of lies, but Ayanna's words echoed in his mind. Life is simple. We make it complicated. I'm sorry, he said quietly. You deserve better than this. Better than me. Emily straightened, gathering her dignity like armor. I'm going home. When you've come to your senses, you know where to find me. She paused at the door. But don't wait too long. Thomas, Father's patience has limits, and there are other men who would be grateful for what you're so eager to throw away. After she left, Thomas sat in the gathering darkness, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. But when he closed his eyes, all he could see was Ayanna dancing in the moonlight, free and fierce and achingly beautiful. He'd saved a life today, but in doing so, he'd lost the one he'd planned, and for the first time in weeks, Thomas felt like he could breathe. The confrontation with Emily had left the ranch feeling hollow, like a house abandoned before its time. Thomas moved through his days mechanically, aware of the whispers among his hands, the concerned looks from Jake. Word traveled fast in the territory. Thomas Granger had quarreled with the mayor's daughter. The wedding everyone had been anticipating now hung in doubt. It was Maria, his Mexican housekeeper, who finally broke the silence that had settled over the main house. Senor Thomas, she said one evening, setting down his untouched dinner. The men, they talk, they say you are not yourself. They worry. Tell them to worry about the cattle. Thomas replied without looking up from the ledgers he wasn't really reading. Maria stood her ground, a small woman with steel in her spine. A man cannot live on emptiness. Senor, whatever troubles you, it will not be solved by starving. Thomas finally met her eyes. Maria had worked for his family since before his mother died. She'd earned the right to speak plainly. Did you ever love someone you shouldn't? Maria? Her weathered face softened. Si, senor, once, long ago. What did you do? I married the man my father chose, had 6 children, buried 3. She crossed herself. But on quiet nights, I still remember the vaquero who made my heart sing. Some loves, they are not meant for this world. They live only here. She touched her chest. After she left, Thomas sat in the darkness, wondering if that would be his fate. A lifetime of quiet nights and memories. But even as he thought it, he knew he couldn't accept it. Not yet. Not without... What? What did he hope to gain by seeing Ayanna again? The answer came 3 days later when a summer storm rolled in from the mountains. It started as a dust devil on the horizon, building into a wall of black clouds that turned day to night. Lightning split the sky, and the wind howled like a living thing. Thomas was helping secure the barn when Jake rode in hard. Flash flood coming down Skeleton Canyon, Jake shouted over the wind. Saw it starting when I was checking the east pasture. That Apache woman. Thomas didn't wait to hear more. He was on Bourbon and riding before Jake could finish, plunging into the teeth of the storm. The rain, when it came, was brutal. Drops like bullets, turning the ground to mud in seconds. Lightning illuminated the landscape in snapshot bursts. Twisted junipers, running water where none should be. The canyon mouth growing closer. He could hear the flood before he saw it. A roar like a freight train, echoing off the canyon walls. When lightning next lit the sky, he saw the water, a wall of brown chaos carrying trees, rocks, everything in its path. And there, on a slight rise barely above the torrent, Ayanna's wickiup shelter, already half collapsed. Thomas pushed Bourbon harder, splashing through water that grew deeper by the second. He saw her then, struggling to save her medicine bundles, the water rising around her legs. "Leave them!" he shouted, but his voice was lost in the storm. He reached her just as a larger surge broke free upstream. There was no time for words. Thomas leaned down, grabbed her around the waist, and hauled her onto Bourbon despite her struggles. The horse, true to his bloodline, wheeled and ran as the water crashed into where Ayanna had been standing seconds before. They rode hard for higher ground. Ayanna pressed against him, her body rigid with what he thought was fear, until he heard her sobbing. Not fear, grief. Everything she owned, everything that connected her to her dead husband, was being swept away by the flood. Thomas found shelter under an overhang of rock, barely wide enough to protect them and Bourbon from the worst of the storm. He dismounted and lifted Ayanna down, her doe-skin dress soaked through, her body shaking. "My medicines," she said, her voice broken. "My husband's things. Everything." "You're alive," Thomas said firmly. "That's what matters. To you, perhaps." She pulled away from him, wrapping her arms around herself. "You do not understand. Those were sacred things. His war shirt, his prayer feathers. Now he truly is gone." The storm raged on, trapping them in their small shelter. Thomas unsaddled Bourbon and used the saddle blanket to build a small barrier against the wind. He had matches wrapped in oilcloth, a frontier habit that had saved his life more than once. Soon he had a small fire going from the dry wood scattered under the overhang. "You'll catch fever," he said, noting how she shivered. "Come closer to the fire." "I do not need—" "Please." He softened his voice. "Let me help." She moved closer reluctantly, and in the firelight, he could see her clearly. The proud mask had cracked, revealing the woman beneath, young, grieving, human. Water dripped from her hair, and he realized she was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with Emily's carefully arranged prettiness. This was beauty carved by loss and survival, refined by suffering into something pure. "Why did you come?" she asked quietly. "You could have died in that flood." Thomas considered his answer. "Jake saw the storm heading for the canyon. I knew you were there." "Many people would have known. None would have come." He met her eyes across the fire. "I'm not many people." "No," she agreed. "You are a fool." Despite everything, Thomas found himself almost smiling. "My father used to say the same thing." They sat in silence for a while, the storm gradually spending its fury outside. The fire crackled between them, creating a small world separate from everything beyond the overhang. "Your woman," Ayanna said eventually. "She will be very angry." "She's not my woman, not anymore." Ayanna looked at him sharply. "Because of me?" "No. Because of me. Because I finally admitted what I've known for months. That I was marrying her for all the wrong reasons." "And what are the right reasons?" Thomas watched the fire shadows dance on the rock walls. "My mother used to look at my father like he hung the stars, even when they were arguing about money or the ranch or his drinking. There was something underneath it all, something that made everything else bearable." He paused. "I don't have that with Emily. I never will." "Love is a luxury," Ayanna said softly. "My marriage was arranged by our families, but we learned to care for each other. He was a good man, strong. He died protecting our people." Her voice caught. "Sometimes duty is enough." "Is it?" Thomas turned to look at her directly. "Then why do you dance alone in the moonlight? What are you trying to find in those movements?" She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I dance to remember, to forget, to feel something besides anger." She pulled her knees to her chest, looking suddenly very young. "When I dance, sometimes I can pretend the world is different, that my husband still lives, that my people are not penned on reservations like cattle, that I am not a ghost woman living between two worlds that both reject me." The raw honesty in her words made Thomas's chest tight. Without thinking, he reached across the small space and covered her hand with his. She tensed but didn't pull away. "You're not a ghost," he said. "No, then what am I? Apache to the whites who fear me. White man's woman to the Apache who see me trading in town. I belong nowhere. You belong to yourself." She looked at their joined hands, his sun-brown but still pale against her copper skin. "You speak pretty words, Thomas Granger, but words change nothing." The storm was passing, the thunder growing distant. Soon they would have to leave this shelter, return to their separate worlds. But Thomas found himself desperate to hold on to this moment, this unexpected connection. "Teach me," he said suddenly. "Teach you what?" "The dance, the one I saw that night." She pulled her hand away. "That is not for you." "Why?" "It is sacred, personal." "You would not understand. Then help me understand." She studied him in the firelight, and he could see her weighing him, measuring his sincerity. Finally, she stood, moving to where there was just enough space beneath the overhang. "This is the dance of grief," she said quietly. "We dance it for those who have traveled to the spirit world. Each movement is a memory, a prayer, a letting go." She began to move, slowly at first, her wet dress clinging to her form. But as she continued, something transformed. The cramped space, the dying fire, the lingering storm, all of it fell away. She became something elemental, her movements telling a story of love and loss that needed no words. Thomas watched, transfixed. When she extended her hand to him, he didn't hesitate. He rose and tried to follow her movements, clumsy and self-conscious at first. She guided him with small touches, adjusting his arms, showing him how to feel the rhythm that seemed to come from the earth itself. "Do not think," she said. "Feel. The dance is here." She placed her hand over his heart. "Not here," touching his forehead. They moved together in the small space, two bodies finding a rhythm as old as sorrow itself. Thomas felt something crack open inside him, all the rigid control he'd maintained for years beginning to crumble. When she stumbled on the uneven ground, he caught her, and suddenly they were standing close, breathing hard, faces inches apart. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Thomas could see the pulse beating in her throat, could feel the warmth of her body despite the wet clothes. Her eyes, dark as deep pools, held his. "We should not," she whispered, but she didn't move away. "I know," he said, but his hand was already cupping her face, thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. She made a sound, half sob, half surrender, and then they were kissing. It was nothing like the chaste pecks he'd shared with Emily. This was desperation and loneliness and recognition all at once. She tasted of rain and herbs and something wild that made his blood sing. When they broke apart, both were shaking. "This is madness," Ayanna said, pressing her forehead against his chest. "Yes," Thomas agreed, holding her close. "Complete madness." They stood there as the last of the storm passed, clinging to each other like survivors of a shipwreck. Outside their shelter, the world waited with all its rules and divisions and impossibilities. But for now, in this moment, they had found something true. When the rain finally stopped, reality crept back in. They would have to leave, return to their lives, face the consequences of what had just shifted between them. "I should check if anything survived the flood," Ayanna said, pulling away reluctantly. They ventured out together, leading Bourbon carefully down the now treacherous path. The canyon had been transformed. Where her shelter had stood was nothing but mud and debris. Everything was gone. Ayanna stood silently surveying the destruction, her face once again a mask. But Thomas had held her as she shook, had tasted her tears. He knew what lay beneath that composure now. "Come back to the ranch," he said. "Just until you can rebuild." "No." "Ayanna." "No." She turned to face him. "What happened in that shelter? It cannot happen again. We both know this." "I don't know any such thing." "Then you are a bigger fool than I thought." Her voice was gentle despite the harsh words. "Your world and mine. They do not meet except in violence. Today you saved my life. I am grateful, but gratitude is not a foundation for whatever you think this is. This isn't about gratitude, and you know it." She looked away. "I know many things. Thomas Granger, I know that your people killed my husband. I know that they would kill you for touching me as you did. I know that love between us can only end in sorrow." She met his eyes again. "And I know that despite all of this, when you leave here today, you will take a piece of my spirit with you." Thomas felt her words like physical blows, but before he could respond, she was walking away, heading higher into the canyon where the flood hadn't reached. "Where will you go?" he called after her. "There are caves higher up, sacred places. I will shelter there until I can rebuild. Let me help. You have helped enough." She paused without turning back. "Do not come back, Thomas. If you care for me at all, do not come back." Thomas watched her disappear among the rocks, every instinct screaming at him to follow, but he knew she was right. Returning to the ranch with him would destroy what little standing she had left, would put them both in danger. He mounted Bourbon and rode home through a world washed clean by the storm. But he felt dirtier than ever, covered in the grime of impossible desires and social rules he no longer believed in. At the ranch, Jake was waiting, relief clear on his face. "Thank God," the foreman said. "We thought you'd been swept away. Did you find her?" "She survived," Thomas said shortly. "Lost everything in the flood, but she's alive." Jake nodded, asking no more questions. That was the way of men on the frontier. Some things were better left unspoken. But as Thomas washed the mud from his body and tried to return to normal life, he knew something fundamental had changed. The taste of her was still on his lips. The feel of her in his arms had awakened something that would not go back to sleep. In town, rumors would already be spreading. Thomas Granger had ridden into a deadly storm to save an Apache woman. Questions would be asked, conclusions drawn. The careful life he'd built was beginning to unravel, and he found he didn't care. That night, as he lay in his too-soft bed, Thomas understood what Ayanna had meant about taking a piece of her spirit, because she had taken something from him too, the ability to pretend that duty and prosperity were enough. Outside, the moon rose full and bright over the desert, and somewhere in the sacred caves, a woman danced alone with her grief, and Thomas Granger, successful rancher, respected citizen, finally admitted to himself that he was completely, irrevocably lost. The days following the storm passed in a haze of whispered conversations and sidelong glances. Thomas could feel the weight of speculation pressing down on him wherever he went. In town, conversations stopped when he entered Muller's store. At the bank, Harold Morrison counted his money twice, as if Thomas's presence had somehow tainted the bills. It was Emily who finally forced the confrontation everyone had been waiting for. She arrived at the ranch on a Tuesday afternoon, accompanied by her father and two of his men. Mayor William Carter was a large man who'd grown soft with prosperity, but his eyes remained sharp as a hawk's. He stood on Thomas's porch like he owned it, which, in a way, Thomas supposed he did. Half of Thomas's loans went through Carter's bank. "Thomas," Emily said, her voice steady but her eyes red-rimmed. "We need to discuss our situation." "Come in," Thomas said, stepping aside. He noticed how Emily flinched away from him as she passed, as if his proximity might contaminate her. They sat in the parlor, Emily and her father on the settee, Thomas in his leather chair. The two men stood by the door like prison guards. "I'll make this simple," Mayor Carter began without preamble. "This foolishness ends now. Whatever fascination you've developed for that savage woman, you'll put it aside. You'll apologize to Emily, set a new wedding date, and we'll move forward as planned." Thomas felt a cold calm settle over him. "And if I refuse?" Carter's face darkened. "Then I'll call in your loans. Every penny. You'll lose this ranch, your cattle, everything your father built. You'll be just another drifter with a ruined name." "Father," Emily interjected, her voice strained. "That's not necessary. Thomas just needs time to—" "Time," Carter turned on his daughter. The whole territory is laughing at us. Thomas Granger, riding into floodwaters to save his Apache whore. She's not my... Thomas stopped himself, his hands clenching. I saved a human being from drowning. If that's cause for scandal, then perhaps it's this town that needs examining, not me. Don't be naive. Carter sneered. We all know what this is about. A man has needs. I understand that, but there are ways to handle such things discreetly. You don't throw away a respectable marriage for a role with some Indian widow. Thomas stood abruptly, fury coursing through him. Get out. Thomas, Emily pleaded. Please, just listen. I said get out, all of you. Carter stood slowly, his bulk imposing. You have 1 week to come to your senses. After that, I'll begin proceedings to collect on your debts. He adjusted his vest with deliberate calm. And Thomas, that savage you're so concerned about? She won't last long once word spreads about your interest. Some of the boys in town are already talking. Shame if something happened to her. The threat hung in the air like smoke. After they left, Thomas stood in his empty parlor, understanding finally the full weight of what he'd set in motion. It wasn't just his future at stake anymore. That night, unable to bear the walls closing in, Thomas rode out to the canyon. He told himself he was just checking on Ayanna, making sure she was safe, but when he found her temporary shelter, a shallow cave high in the rocks, he knew he'd been lying to himself. She was tending a small fire, her face illuminated by the flames. She looked up at his approach, unsurprised. I told you not to come back. Carter threatened you, Thomas said without preamble. Some of the men in town, they might try to hurt you. They have been trying to hurt me since the day my husband died. Ayanna said calmly, This is not new. It's different now, because of me, because of what people are saying. And what are they saying? Thomas dismounted, moving closer to the fire. That we're... He couldn't finish. That I am your woman. Ayanna's voice was flat. Yes, I have heard. The Mexican traders whisper. Soon the Apache will hear too. I will be unwelcome everywhere. I'm sorry, I never meant... Didn't you? She looked at him directly then, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. When you rode into that flood, when you held me in the shelter, when you kissed me, what did you think would happen? Thomas sat heavily on a rock. I wasn't thinking. No, you were feeling. That is your weakness. Thomas Granger, you feel too much in a world that rewards those who feel nothing. They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Ayanna spoke again. I must leave this place. No. The word came out sharper than Thomas intended. This is your home, your husband's grave. My husband is dead. I cannot join him by staying here. She poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. There is a Apache band that lives 3 days north. My husband's cousin leads them. They will take me in. When? Soon, before the new moon. Thomas felt panic rise in his throat. That's only a week away. Yes. Ayanna, please, there must be another way. Another way? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Tell me, Thomas Granger, what other way? Will you marry me? Make me mistress of your ranch? Will the good people of the town welcome me into their church? Each question was an arrow finding its mark. Thomas knew the impossibility of what she described, but still he persisted. I could protect you. You cannot even protect yourself. Your woman's father will destroy you for defying him. Then we could leave together, go somewhere else. California. Maybe, or... Stop. Ayanna stood abruptly. You speak like a child who believes in stories. We are not characters in your books. Thomas, we are real people in a real world where Apache women and white men do not ride off into sunsets together. Thomas stood too, moving around the fire toward her. I know what's real. What's real is how I feel when I look at you. What's real is that kiss in the storm. That kiss was a mistake. Ayanna backed away. A moment of weakness I have paid for every night since. You feel it too. Thomas pressed on. I know you do. When we danced together. When you taught me the movements. I taught you nothing. Her composure finally cracked. You learn nothing. The dance of grief is not for you, can never be for you. You play at understanding, but you are still just another white man who takes what he wants. The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. He stopped advancing, seeing suddenly how he must look to her. Another white man pressing his desires on an Apache woman who had already lost everything. You're right, he said quietly. I'm sorry. I'll go. But as he turned to leave, Ayanna made a sound, half sob, half plea. When he looked back, tears were streaming down her face. I hate you, she whispered. I hate you for making me want things I cannot have, for making me dream of a different world, for making me weak when I need to be strong. Thomas crossed to her in 2 strides, catching her hands in his. You're the strongest person I know. Then why do I shake when you touch me? Her voice broke completely. Why do I listen for your horse? Why do I dance now and see your clumsy movements trying to follow mine? Ayanna, I was ready to die, she continued, the words pouring out like water through a broken dam. After my husband was killed, after I buried him with my own hands, I was ready to follow him, but I stayed because someone had to tend his grave, keep his memory alive. I built walls around my heart and lived behind them. Then you, she looked up at him, eyes swimming. You with your kind eyes and foolish bravery and gentle hands, you ruined everything. Thomas pulled her against him, feeling her resistance crumble. She cried into his chest, great shuddering sobs that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. He held her, stroking her hair, murmuring senseless comfort. When her tears finally slowed, she pulled back slightly, looking up at him. We are fools, you and I. Yes, Thomas agreed. This can only end in sorrow. I know. You should leave now. Go back to your ranch. Marry your pale woman. Be safe. I should, Thomas said, but instead, he lowered his head and kissed her. This kiss was different from the desperate clash in the storm. This was slower, deeper, tinged with the salt of her tears and the bitter knowledge of impossibility. When they broke apart, both were breathing unsteadily. Stay with me tonight, Ayanna whispered. Just tonight. Tomorrow we can return to being sensible. Thomas knew he should refuse, knew that every moment he stayed increased the danger to them both. But faced with the warmth of her body and the promise in her eyes, his resolve crumbled like sand. She led him deeper into the cave where she'd made a simple pallet of blankets traded from the Mexicans. The firelight didn't reach this far, leaving them in intimate darkness. Thomas's hands trembled as he helped her remove the doe-skin dress, revealing skin like burnished copper in the dim light. I've never, Ayanna started, then stopped. My husband was the only. We don't have to, Thomas said, though his body screamed otherwise. We can just. She silenced him with a kiss, her hands working at the buttons of his shirt. I want to know what it feels like to choose. They came together with a tenderness born of sorrow. Each touch a goodbye, neither wanted to speak. Thomas tried to memorize every sensation. The silk of her hair spread across the blankets, the way she gasped when he found sensitive places, the fierce grip of her hands on his shoulders as they moved together in ancient rhythm. Afterwards, they lay entwined, neither willing to break the spell with words. Ayanna traced patterns on Thomas's chest, the same movements from her dance, he realized, but gentler now, like blessings, in another world. She said finally, we could have been happy. We could be happy in this world. Thomas insisted, though even he could hear the desperation in his voice. No. She pressed a kiss to his chest, over his heart. But we have had this night. When I am old and alone, I will remember that once a white man looked at me and saw not a savage or a conquest, but a woman worth riding into floodwaters for. Ayanna. Shh. She moved up to kiss him quiet. No more words. Words are for tomorrow. They made love again as dawn crept into the cave, slow and bittersweet as the last dance. When the sun finally forced them to acknowledge the new day, they dressed in silence, the weight of reality settling back onto their shoulders like a familiar burden. Thomas prepared to leave, knowing that Carter's deadline loomed, that decisions had to be made. At the cave entrance, Ayanna stopped him with a hand on his arm. "I will leave before the new moon," she said firmly. "Do not come back here. Do not look for me. If you care for me at all, let me go." Thomas wanted to protest, to rage against the unfairness of it all. Instead, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her one last time, pouring all his frustrated love and impossible dreams into the contact. "Be safe," he whispered against her lips. "You too," she replied. Thomas mounted Bourbon and rode away without looking back, knowing that if he turned, his resolve would shatter. Behind him, Ayanna stood watching until he disappeared into the desert's shimmer, her hand pressed to her lips as if to hold his kiss there forever. Back at the ranch, Jake took one look at Thomas's face and asked no questions, just handed him a bottle of whiskey and pointed toward the account books that needed attention. Thomas threw himself into work, trying to lose himself in numbers and plans that no longer seemed to matter. But when night fell and the moon rose over the desert, Thomas stood on his porch and wondered if Ayanna was dancing somewhere in those sacred caves, dancing her grief for what could never be. He raised the whiskey bottle in a silent toast to impossible love and took another drink, trying to drown the taste of her that lingered on his lips like a promise he could never keep. 1 week, Carter had said. 1 week to choose between everything he'd built and everything he'd never known he wanted until it was too late. Thomas laughed bitterly at the moon, as if he had any choice at all. The week passed like water through clenched fists. Thomas threw himself into ranch work with desperate energy, but everywhere he turned, he felt the noose tightening. 2 of his best hands quit without explanation. The bank sent a man to assess the property value. Even the weather seemed to conspire against him. No rain, the creek running lower, cattle growing restless in the heat. On the 5th day, Jake brought news that turned Thomas's blood cold. "Riders went out to Skeleton Canyon last night," the foreman said, his face grim. "Led by Charlie Morrison and some of the boys from town, found her camp, but she was gone. They burned what little she'd built." Thomas gripped the fence post until his knuckles went white. "Anyone hurt?" "No, like I said, she was already gone. But Thomas—" Jake hesitated, then continued. "They left a message, said next time they find her, burning her shelter won't be all they do." That night, Thomas couldn't stand it anymore. He rode out toward the canyon, but instead of going to the caves, he circled wide. Using skills his father had taught him to read sign, he found what he was looking for 2 miles north. Faint tracks, carefully obscured but still visible to someone who knew how to look. Ayanna was moving north, as she'd said she would, but slowly, too slowly. At this rate, the men from town would catch her before she reached the Apache band. He was still debating what to do when he heard horses approaching. Thomas quickly moved Bourbon into a stand of juniper, watching as 5 riders passed below. Charlie Morrison led them, a man with dead eyes and a reputation for violence. They were following Ayanna's trail. Thomas waited until they were out of sight, then spurred Bourbon forward. Taking a parallel route he hoped would let him reach Ayanna first. The moon was rising when he finally spotted her small campfire in a sheltered draw. She heard him coming, rifle ready, but lowered it when she recognized him. "I told you not to—" "Morrison and his men are tracking you." Thomas cut her off. "Maybe an hour behind me. You need to move, now." Ayanna's face went still. She began efficiently packing her few belongings. "How many?" "5, armed." Thomas dismounted, helping her scatter the fire. "I'll delay them. Buy you time to—" "No." She stopped packing, turning to face him. "You will not fight 5 men for me. I won't let them—" "You won't let them." Fire flashed in her eyes. "This is not your choice, Thomas. This is my fight." "It's my fault they're hunting you. The least I can do is—" His words were cut short by the sound of approaching horses. Closer than he'd thought. Much closer. "Too late," Ayanna said quietly. She moved with sudden purpose. pushing Thomas toward a cluster of rocks. "Hide. Do not come out, no matter what happens. I'm not hiding while you will make this worse," she hissed. "If they find you here with me, they will kill us both. If I face them alone, perhaps—" Well. Charlie Morrison's voice cut through the darkness. "Look what we found. Boys." 5 riders emerged from the shadows, spreading out to surround them. Thomas saw Ayanna straighten, her face becoming a mask of calm defiance. "You are on Apache land," she said clearly. "Leave." Morrison laughed. "Apache land. Last I checked, this was America, squaw, and America's got no place for murdering savages. My husband killed soldiers in war. White men kill Apache women and children in their sleep. Who is savage? Your husband's dead." Morrison spat. "And you're about to join him unless you're real nice to us." Thomas started to move, but Ayanna caught his eye, a tiny shake of her head keeping him in place. He watched, fists clenched, as Morrison dismounted. "Course, maybe we don't have to hurt you," Morrison continued, moving closer to Ayanna. "Maybe you could show us some of that hospitality your people are famous for. I would die first. That can be arranged too." What happened next occurred so fast Thomas almost missed it. Morrison reached for Ayanna. She moved like lightning, a knife appearing in her hand, slashing across Morrison's arm. He howled, stumbling back, and his men raised their rifles. Thomas couldn't stay hidden any longer. He burst from the rocks, his own rifle trained on the group. "That's enough!" The men froze, confused by his sudden appearance. Morrison clutched his bleeding arm, his face twisted with rage. "Granger, what the hell are you—" Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Oh, this is Rich, Thomas Granger, protecting his Apache whore. The only one leaving here hurt is you, Charlie, unless you and your boys ride out now. 5 against 1. Granger, you ain't that good a shot." "Maybe not," Thomas said steadily, "but I'll take at least 2 of you with me, starting with you, Charlie. Question is, which of your boys wants to die for your entertainment?" The mounted men shifted nervously. Fighting an armed Apache woman was one thing. Adding Thomas Granger, known to be an excellent shot and with the law's sympathy likely on his side, changed the calculation. "This ain't over," Morrison snarled, but he was already backing toward his horse. "You've chosen your side. Granger, you and your savage bitch both gonna pay." They rode off, Morrison cursing and threatening. Thomas kept his rifle raised until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Only then did he turn to Ayanna. "Are you hurt?" "No." She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't read. "Why did you do that? Now they know for certain. Now you have made yourself their enemy too." "I was already their enemy." Thomas suddenly felt exhausted. "Ayanna, please, come back to the ranch. Just until—" "Until what? Until they burn your ranch? Until they hang you for harboring an Apache?" She shook her head. "No, Thomas, we both know how this ends. Then we leave together. Tonight. We can be in Mexico by— Thomas." She moved closer, placing her hand over his heart. "My brave, foolish man. Don't you understand? There is nowhere we can go where this," she gestured to the space between them, "is acceptable. Nowhere. I don't care about acceptable, because you have never been unacceptable. You have never been spat on, refused service, had stones thrown at your back. You have never watched your people driven from their homes like animals." Her voice was gentle but implacable. "You do not know what you are saying." Thomas caught her hand, holding it against his chest. "Then teach me, show me, let me learn." "Oh, my heart," she whispered, and he saw tears in her eyes. "You would try, wouldn't you? You would give up everything and try to live in my world." "Yes, but I have already seen too much death, lost too much. I will not watch them destroy you too." She pulled her hand free. "Go home, Thomas. Go now, before they come back. Not without you." They stood facing each other in the moonlight, an impossible situation with no good solution. Finally, Ayanna spoke. "One more night, then. Give me one more night, then I will go to my people, and you will return to yours." Thomas wanted to argue, but he saw the finality in her eyes. One more night. It wasn't enough. Could never be enough. But it was what she offered. They made camp deeper in the hills, in a box canyon Thomas knew from hunting trips. Hidden, defensible, with a small spring that kept a patch of grass green even in drought. They built a small fire and sat close together, not speaking much, just existing in the same space while they could. "Tell me about him," Thomas said eventually. "Your husband." Ayanna looked surprised. "You want to know about White Eagle?" "You loved him. He was part of who you are. I want to understand." She was quiet for a long moment, then began to speak. She told him about a young warrior who could make her laugh, who brought her the first deer he killed, who held her when their infant son died of the white man's sickness. She spoke of raids and resistance, of trying to hold on to the old ways as their world crumbled, of the final battle where White Eagle led a charge against impossible odds. "He knew he would die," she said softly. "But he said it was better to die like an Apache than live like a dog." She looked at Thomas. "I honored his choice, but I have been so angry since. Angry at him for leaving me, angry at your people for taking him, angry at myself for surviving. And now, she leaned against his shoulder. Now I'm only sad. Sad for what was, sad for what can never be." She turned to look up at him. "But not sorry. Whatever happens, I will never be sorry for these moments with you." They made love under the stars, slow and tender and full of goodbye. Afterwards, they held each other as if they could stop time through sheer will. But dawn came anyway, painting the canyon walls in shades of rose and gold. "I have something for you," Ayanna said as they prepared to part. She pulled out a small leather pouch on a cord. This was White Eagle's, a protection charm. "I want you to have it." "I can't take—" "Please." She tied it around his neck, her fingers lingering on his chest. "Let me protect you the only way I can." Thomas kissed her one last time, pouring everything he couldn't say into the contact. When they pulled apart, both had tears on their faces. "Be happy," Ayanna whispered. "Promise me you will try to be happy." "How can I promise that? Because if you are miserable, then all of this," she gestured between them, "was for nothing. Be happy for both of us. Live for both of us." Thomas couldn't speak past the knot in his throat. He mounted Bourbon, looking down at her one last time. She stood straight and proud, every inch the Apache woman who had danced alone in the moonlight. But now he knew the woman beneath, the one who laughed and cried and loved with a depth that humbled him. He rode away without looking back, the leather pouch warm against his chest. Behind him, Ayanna watched until he disappeared, then began her own journey north. By nightfall, she would reach her people. By nightfall, they would be in separate worlds forever. Thomas returned to find Jake waiting on the porch, a telegram in his hand. "From Carter," the foreman said. "Your week is up." Thomas took the paper, scanning the terse message. "Report to the bank by noon or face immediate foreclosure." He looked around the ranch his father had built, the life he'd worked so hard to maintain. Then he looked north, where somewhere Ayanna was riding towards safety and a future that didn't include him. "Jake," he said quietly, "how much would it cost to pay off the hands through the end of the month?" "Thomas, what are you—" "How much?" Jake named a figure. Thomas nodded. "See to it. And Jake, you've been a good friend. The best. I want you to know that." The foreman's weathered face creased with concern. "Thomas, whatever you're thinking, I'm thinking it's time to stop living for everyone else's expectations." Thomas said. He clapped Jake on the shoulder and went inside to clean up. At noon, he walked into Carter's bank, clean-shaven and wearing his best suit. Emily was there, beautiful in blue silk, her face a mixture of hope and apprehension. Mayor Carter sat behind his massive desk like a judge at trial. "Well," Carter demanded, "have you come to your senses?" Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. "This is the deed to the eastern 1,000 acres. Current market value should more than cover what I owe you." Carter's face went red. "You're selling?" "I'm paying my debts." Thomas corrected. Fair and square. The ranch stays in my name, free and clear. Thomas. Emily stood, reaching for him. Please, we can work this out. I know you're upset, but I'm not upset. Emily? Thomas's voice was gentle. For the first time in my life, I'm clear about what I want. And it's not this, not a marriage of convenience, not a political future, not a life built on what others expect of me. That savage woman, Carter began, is gone, Thomas said flatly. North to her people. I'll likely never see her again, but she taught me something valuable, that there are things worth more than money or position or safety. He turned to Emily. You deserve better than a man who's marrying you for your father's influence. You deserve someone who looks at you the way I... He stopped. You deserve real love. Emily, I hope you find it. He left them there. Carter sputtering threats he no longer had the power to enforce. Emily finally letting her tears fall. Outside, the sun beat down on the dusty street, and Thomas felt lighter than he had in years. The ranch would survive, smaller but unencumbered. He would survive too, carrying the memory of an Apache woman who had danced her way into his heart and taught him that some things were worth losing everything for. That night, Thomas stood on his porch, watching the moon rise over the desert. Somewhere out there, Ayanna was safe with her people. They would never share a life, never wake up together to watch the sunrise, never grow old side by side, but they'd had their moments. A dance in moonlight, a kiss in a storm, 2 nights of impossible love. Some people lived whole lifetimes without feeling what they'd shared. Thomas touched the leather pouch at his chest and whispered a prayer to whatever spirits might be listening, Apache or Christian or simply the vast indifferent universe. A prayer for Ayanna's happiness, for her safety, for her to find peace at last. The wind carried his words out into the desert, where they disappeared like smoke. But Thomas liked to think that somewhere, somehow, she heard them, that she knew she was loved by a foolish white rancher who'd learned too late that the heart has its own laws, and they supersede all others. He went inside and poured himself a whiskey, raising it in a toast to impossible love and necessary goodbyes. Tomorrow he would begin rebuilding his life, smaller but more honest than before. But tonight he would remember, and in remembering, keep alive something precious and painful and absolutely worth the price he'd paid. The moon traveled its ancient path across the sky, and Thomas Granger sat in the darkness, a changed man carrying the ghost of a dance that would haunt him forever. 3 months passed in a blur of hard work and willful forgetting. Thomas threw himself into saving what remained of his ranch, working alongside his few remaining hands from dawn to dusk. The loss of the eastern acres meant moving the entire operation, consolidating the herds, making do with less. But he was free of debt, free of obligations, free of everything except the memories that visited him in the quiet hours. Then came the morning when Jake rode in hard from checking the north pasture, his face grim. Thomas, you need to see this. They rode out together to where the fence line bordered the old Apache trails. There, tied to a post, was a piece of red cloth, a signal. Jake explained that someone wanted to parley. Someone who knew the old ways. Could be traitors, Jake said doubtfully, or could be trouble. But Thomas's heart was already racing. He waited until nightfall, then rode out alone to the designated spot, a cluster of rocks where the trail forked. A figure emerged from the shadows, not Ayanna, but an elderly Apache man with a face mapped by years and weather. You are the white man who helped my niece, the old man said without preamble. Thomas's breath caught. Ayanna, is she? She is why I come. The old man studied him with dark, knowing eyes. She is with our band, safe, but not well. What's wrong? Is she sick? Sick in spirit. She does not eat, does not speak. Dances only the grief dance, night after night. He paused. She mourns the living as she once mourned the dead. Thomas gripped his saddle horn until the leather creaked. Why are you telling me this? Because I am old and have seen much. I have seen hate destroy both Apache and white. but I have also seen love bridge worlds." The old man pulled out a rolled hide. "She made this. Sits all day drawing pictures that tell stories. Stories of a white man who rode into floodwaters, who stood against 5 men, who gave up wealth for honor, with trembling hands." Thomas unrolled the hide. Even in the moonlight, he could see the delicate work, pictographs telling their story in the Apache way. There was the flood, the cave, 2 figures dancing, and at the bottom, a single image that made his throat close, 2 hands reaching for each other across a great divide. "What do you want from me?" Thomas asked hoarsely. "Want? Nothing. But I tell you this. Tomorrow, soldiers come to move our band west, to Oklahoma lands, far from here, far from everything." The old man turned to go, then paused. "She will pass through Box Canyon at first light, the place where water runs even in drought." He disappeared into the darkness before Thomas could respond, leaving only the painted hide and a choice that was no choice at all. Thomas rode back to the ranch in a daze. He found Jake still awake, mending tack by lamplight. "I'm leaving," Thomas said without preamble. "Maybe for good." Jake set down his work. "The Apache woman?" "Yes." The foreman was quiet for a long moment. "Your father would roll in his grave." "Probably. You'll lose everything. The respect you got left, the ranch eventually. No way to run this place from Oklahoma territory." "I know." Jake stood, walked to the wall, and took down a pair of well-worn saddlebags. "These were your daddy's. Used them when he first came west. Nothing to his name but hope and stubbornness." He handed them to Thomas. "Seems fitting they should go with you now." Thomas's throat was tight. "Jake, don't go getting sentimental on me now." Jake's voice was gruff. "Just be happy, boy. Be happier than your father ever let himself be." Thomas spent the night preparing. He packed light, clothes, ammunition, what money he had on hand. He wrote out papers giving Jake authority to run the ranch, to sell if necessary, to do whatever was needed. As dawn approached, he saddled Bourbon and a pack horse, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to do. He reached Box Canyon just as the eastern sky began to lighten. The Apache band was already moving through, maybe 30 people, horses, dogs, a few wagons carrying the elderly and supplies. Soldiers rode alongside, rifles prominent, herding them like cattle toward a future none of them had chosen. Thomas positioned himself on a rise where he could see without being immediately visible. His heart hammered as he scanned the group, searching for... There, walking beside a travois that carried an old woman, her head down, feet dragging like one already defeated. Even from a distance, he could see how thin she'd become, how the proud posture had given way to something broken. Thomas spurred Bourbon forward, riding straight toward the column. Soldiers raised rifles, shouting warnings. The Apache watched with suspicious eyes, but Thomas only had eyes for Ayanna, who had looked up at the commotion. Time seemed to stop as their eyes met across the distance. Then she was running, and he was off his horse, and they collided in the space between worlds, holding each other like drowning souls finding shore. "You came," she sobbed into his chest. "You fool, you beautiful fool. You came." "I'll always come," Thomas said fiercely. "Always." "What the hell is going on here?" A sergeant rode up, face red with anger. "Get away from that woman, mister." Thomas didn't let go. "I'm going with them. Like hell you are. No civilians on this removal. Then I'll follow. Every day. Every mile." Thomas finally looked at the soldier. "You can shoot me, I suppose, but that might be hard to explain. White rancher killed for loving an Apache woman. Not sure your superiors would appreciate that story getting out." The sergeant looked uncertain. This wasn't in his orders. Meanwhile, the Apache had gathered closer, watching this unprecedented scene. A white man choosing exile with them. It was the elderly man from the night before who spoke up. "He is family," he said in English. "Married to my niece by Apache law. Has right to come." Thomas felt Ayanna stiffen in his arms. "Uncle, we are not..." "You dance the grief dance for living man. He gives up his world for you. What more is marriage than this? A murmur ran through the Apache. Some looked hostile, others curious, a few almost approving. The sergeant looked like he'd swallowed something sour. This is highly irregular. Everything about this is irregular. Thomas said, "But I'm not leaving her. Not again." The sergeant spat tobacco juice. "Your funeral, mister. But you keep up. You cause no trouble. And you remember, once we reach Oklahoma, you're on your own. Government ain't responsible for fool white men who forget their place." And so Thomas Granger, once prosperous rancher, joined the removal march of the Apache. He walked beside Ayanna, leading his horses, feeling the weight of stares, both hostile and puzzled. Some of the Apache wouldn't look at him. Others watched with open suspicion. A few of the children, curious and less burdened by hate, drifted closer. "You should not have come," Ayanna said quietly as they walked. "This is not your tragedy to share. Your tragedy is my tragedy now." Thomas replied, "Your people are my people. Where you go, I go." Pretty words, but when you see what reservation life is like, when you understand what you've given up, then I'll understand. But I'll understand standing beside you. That night, they made camp under guard. Thomas was relegated to the edge, not quite prisoner, but not quite free. Ayanna came to him after dark, bringing food and water. "They are talking about you," she said. "Some say you are crazy. Some say you are a spy. Some—" She paused. "Some remember that you saved me from the flood, that you stood against the men who would hurt me. And what do you say?" She touched his face gently. "I say you are the most foolish man I have ever known, and the bravest, and that I love you more than I thought possible to love again." They held each other in the darkness, aware of the challenges ahead but grateful for this moment. Around them, the Apache made their own camps, tended their children, maintained dignity in the face of removal. Thomas began to understand, in a way he never could have from the comfort of his ranch, what it meant to lose everything but refuse to be broken. The march continued for weeks. Thomas learned to live on the move, to endure the pace, to ignore the hostility of soldiers and the suspicion of the Apache. Slowly, carefully, he began to earn small measures of acceptance. He helped fix a broken wagon wheel, shared his horses with elderly who struggled to walk, used his rifle to bring down game that he gave to families with children. Ayanna translated for him, taught him words in Apache, helped him navigate the complex web of relationships and customs. At night, they slept apart, she with her uncle's family, he on the edges, but always within sight of each other. It was not the life either had imagined, but it was life together, and that was enough. One evening, as they camped by a muddy river, the elderly uncle approached Thomas. "You have walked with us for 20 days, he said, "eaten our dust, shared our shame. Why?" Thomas thought carefully before answering. "Because she is worth more than any ranch, more than any comfortable life, more than the approval of people who would hate her for being who she is." The old man studied him. "And if she had not been beautiful, if she had been old, ugly, bitter, would you still have given up your world?" It was a test, Thomas realized. His answer mattered. "I fell in love with her spirit before I knew her face," he said finally. "I saw her dance her grief and knew she had a strength I'd never possess. The rest," he shrugged, "the rest was just recognition, like finding a piece of myself I didn't know was missing." The uncle nodded slowly. "You speak well for a white man." He pulled out a pipe, lighting it with deliberate movements. "Tomorrow, we will have ceremony. Make your marriage true in the eyes of the people. If you are to walk with us, you walk as family, not a stranger." Thomas felt his heart leap, but kept his voice steady. "I would be honored." "Honor," the old man snorted. "We will see about honor when you have lived 1 year as we must live. When your soft hands are hard from women's work because white man's work is denied you. When your children, if you are blessed with children, are taken to white schools to forget their mother's language." He blew smoke into the night air. "Then we speak of honor." That night, Ayanna came to him, tears on her face. "My uncle, he has agreed, Thomas. Do you understand what this means? To marry me in the Apache way? It means you're my wife, that I'm your husband, that whatever comes, we face it together. It means you become Apache in the eyes of my people, not blood, but belonging. It means when whites look at you, they will see traitor. When Apache look at you, they will see the enemy who shares our blanket. Her voice was urgent. It is not too late. You could leave. Return to your ranch. Remember us kindly, but... Thomas silenced her with a kiss. I've made my choice. Ayanna, I made it the night I saw you dancing. Everything since has just been finding the courage to honor it. The ceremony was simple, held at dawn while the soldiers slept off their whiskey. Thomas wore Apache clothing borrowed from various men, a shirt, leggings, moccasins that didn't quite fit. Ayanna wore a dress decorated with shells and beads, her hair loose and flowing. The uncles spoke words in Apache that Thomas didn't understand but felt in his bones. They exchanged gifts. She gave him a knife with a turquoise handle. He gave her his mother's ring, carried always in his pocket. When it was done, the sun was fully up and the soldiers were stirring. But for the Apache, something had shifted. The white man who walked with them was no longer stranger, but family. Complicated, problematic family, but family nonetheless. The sergeant, when he learned of it, spat and cursed. You've lost your damn mind. Granger, no going back now. Good, Thomas said simply. The march continued, but now Thomas walked differently, not as an outsider following the woman he loved, but as a man who had chosen his place, however difficult that place might be. When they finally reached the reservation lands in Oklahoma, flat, treeless, nothing like the mountains and deserts of home, Thomas stood with his wife and his new people and faced an uncertain future. But Ayanna's hand was in his, and when she looked at him, he saw not grief, but hope. They had lost their separate worlds but found each other. In the arithmetic of love, it balanced. That night, in a traditional shelter built on foreign soil, they came together as husband and wife. Outside, coyotes howled in this strange new land. Inside, Thomas held Ayanna close and whispered promises, not of easy lives or happy endings, but of presence, of partnership, of love that transcended the boundaries others would draw. No regrets? Ayanna asked in the darkness. None, Thomas said, and meant it. You? Only that it took us so long to find our courage. They made love gently, aware that the walls were thin, that privacy was a luxury they'd left behind with so much else. But their bodies knew each other now, found rhythms that needed no words, created their own small world in the midst of exile. Later, as Ayanna slept against his chest, Thomas thought about the ranch he'd left behind, the life he'd abandoned, the future he'd traded for this uncertain present. By any measure the world would use, he'd made a foolish bargain, but the world's measures had never brought him peace, had never made his heart race like her touch did, had never made him feel truly alive. He pressed a kiss to Ayanna's hair and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. How to live on the reservation, how to provide for a wife and perhaps children, how to be Apache enough for her people and still himself. But tonight, he was simply a man holding the woman he loved, and that was wealth beyond measure. Outside, drums began, someone maintaining the old traditions even in this new place. The rhythm was familiar now, the grief dance, but also something more. A dance of survival, of adaptation, of love that refused to recognize the boundaries others drew. Thomas listened, feeling the beat in his chest where Ayanna's head rested, and knew himself home at last. Not in a place, but in a choice. Not in comfort, but in truth. The drums continued through the night, and two hearts beat in time with them. Proof that sometimes the most beautiful dances are those performed in defiance of a world that would keep lovers apart. The early days on the reservation tested every conviction Thomas had carried with him from New Mexico. The flat, treeless expanse of Oklahoma felt like another planet compared to the mountains and mesas of home. The Apache were given the poorest land, soil that turned to dust in summer and mud in winter, with barely enough game to supplement the meager government rations that arrived sporadically and often spoiled. Thomas learned quickly that his skills as a rancher meant little here. The Apache men were forbidden from leaving the reservation to hunt without permission rarely granted. The promised farming implements were broken or never arrived. The cattle they'd been promised to start herds were sick and dying. But it was the children who broke his heart most. They stood in lines for the missionary school, their long hair about to be cut, their names about to be changed, their language about to be beaten out of them with rulers and shame. "This is what you chose," Ayanna said one evening as they watched another family surrender their youngest to the school wagon. Her voice held no accusation, only sadness. "This slow death of a people. We'll survive it." Thomas said, though the words felt hollow, "We'll find a way." That way began with small acts of defiance. Thomas used his connections, the few that still acknowledged him, to write letters. To newspapers back east. To anyone who might listen about the conditions on the reservation. Most letters went unanswered, but a few sparked interest. A Quaker group sent supplies. A senator made inquiries. Meanwhile, Ayanna worked with the women to preserve what they could of the old ways. They taught the young girls beadwork and basket weaving in secret, passing down stories when the missionaries weren't watching. Thomas learned alongside them, his large fingers clumsy with the delicate work but determined to understand. His acceptance among the Apache remained complicated. Some saw him as useful. His ability to read and write English, to navigate white bureaucracy, made him valuable. Others viewed him with permanent suspicion, waiting for him to reveal his true nature, to abandon them as they expected all whites eventually would. It was Joseph Crowfeather, a young man whose family had been killed in the same raid that took Ayanna's husband, who challenged Thomas most directly. "You play at being Apache," Joseph said one night around the communal fire. "But when hardship comes, you will run back to your own kind. My kind are here." Thomas replied evenly, "Your kind took our land, killed our families. Now you share our woman and think that makes you one of us?" The insult hung in the air. Others watched to see how the white man would respond. Thomas felt anger rise but pushed it down. This was not his ranch, where his word was law. This was survival, and pride was a luxury they couldn't afford. "You're right," Thomas said finally. "My people did those things. I can't change that, but I can choose differently. I have chosen differently." Joseph spat into the fire. "Choices are easy when your belly is full. Wait until winter. Wait until the children cry from hunger. Then we see your choices." Winter came early and hard. The government rations were cut, some bureaucratic decision made by men who'd never seen a hungry child. The thin blankets issued to the Apache were insufficient against the Oklahoma wind. Thomas watched his wife portion out their meager supplies, saving the best for the elders and children, taking less for herself. He couldn't stand it. One frozen morning, he saddled Bourbon and rode to the nearest town, ignoring the reservation boundaries. He had a little money left, hidden in his saddlebags. He bought what he could: flour, salt pork, blankets, medicine. On the ride back, Indian Agency police stopped him. "No unauthorized trade with the Indians," the sergeant said, eyeing Thomas's supplies. "I'm not trading. These are for my family." The sergeant laughed. "Your family? Boy, you've gone native complete, haven't you?" He moved to confiscate the supplies. Thomas's hand went to his rifle. "These children won't starve while you play politics. You threatening federal officers? Breed lover?" The moment stretched taut. Thomas knew he was outnumbered. Knew violence would only make things worse. But the thought of returning empty-handed, of watching Ayanna divide nothing into smaller portions of nothing. "Thomas." He turned to see Joseph Crowfeather and 3 other Apache men on horseback. They'd followed him. He realized, watching, waiting to see what he'd do. "Come," Joseph said simply. "We go home now." The police sergeant's face darkened. "You boys are off reservation without—" "We escort our brother," Joseph interrupted. "He is new, does not know all rules yet. We teach him." It was a lie, and everyone knew it, but it offered a way out that saved face. The sergeant grudgingly let them pass, though not without threats about the next time. They rode back in silence, at the reservation boundary. Joseph finally spoke. You would have fought them. For supplies. Yes. Foolish. They would have killed you. Taken supplies anyway. Maybe. Joseph was quiet for a moment. Then, my sister's children are hungry. What you brought will help. It wasn't an apology, wasn't acceptance, but it was acknowledgement. Thomas took it as the gift it was. That winter tested everyone. The shelters, hastily built and poorly insulated, barely kept out the cold. Sickness spread quickly in the cramped conditions. Thomas watched Ayanna work herself to exhaustion, using her healing knowledge to help where she could, but without proper medicines, there was only so much anyone could do. 3 children died in January, then 2 elders. The Apache mourned in their way. When the missionaries weren't watching, Thomas stood with them, learning the proper way to grieve, to honor the dead when the earth was too frozen for burial and the government demanded Christian ceremonies. It was during the funeral for the youngest, a girl of maybe 4 winters, that Thomas broke. He found himself behind their shelter, fists bloody from punching the frozen ground, sobbing with rage and helplessness. Ayanna found him there. She didn't speak, just knelt beside him and held him as he cried. I can't fix this, he said brokenly. I can write letters, buy supplies when I can, but I can't fix any of what matters. I can't bring back the dead or return your land or make any of this right. No, Ayanna agreed softly. You cannot. Then what use am I? What good is choosing to be here if I can't change anything? She pulled back to look at him, her dark eyes serious. You think too much like a white man still, always wanting to fix, to control, to change. Sometimes, Thomas, it is enough to witness, to stand with us in our sorrow, to refuse to look away. That's not enough. It is more than we have ever had from your people. She touched his face gently. Do you think I love you because I believe you can save us? I love you because you see our suffering and do not run, because you choose to share it when you could have comfort elsewhere. That night, as they huddled together for warmth, Ayanna told him something else. I am with child. Thomas's world tilted. Joy and terror warred in his chest. A child. Their child. Here, in this place of death and deprivation. Are you certain? Yes, the signs are clear. She placed his hand on her still flat belly. By harvest time, you will be a father. Ayanna. He struggled for words. I don't know how to protect a child here. I don't know how to be a father in a world that will hate our baby for existing. Then you will learn, as you have learned everything else. She kissed him softly. Our child will be born between worlds, as we live between worlds. But they will be loved, fiercely, completely. That must be enough. Spring brought some relief. The weather warmed. Some supplies got through. Thomas managed to trade letters with Jake, learning that the ranch survived, smaller but stable. His old foreman offered to send money, but Thomas knew any large amount would be confiscated. Instead, he asked for small things, seeds that might grow in poor soil, tools that could be hidden, medicine that could slip past inspections. As Ayanna's pregnancy progressed, the Apache women began to accept Thomas more fully. He was the father of an Apache child now, even if his blood was white. They taught him things, how to build a proper cradle, what songs to sing to an unborn baby, what ceremonies should be done to ensure a healthy birth. The transformation in Joseph Crowfeather was most surprising. The young man who'd challenged Thomas became an unexpected ally, teaching him skills he'd need, how to hunt small game silently, how to find edible plants in unlikely places, how to survive on less than nothing. Why? Thomas asked one day as they checked snares. Joseph shrugged. You stayed through winter, through death, through hunger. Maybe you are a fool, but maybe... He paused. Maybe we need fools. Smart men give up. Fools keep trying. Summer arrived with blazing heat and new challenges. The missionaries increased pressure to civilize the Apache. More children were taken to schools. Traditional ceremonies were banned more strictly. The agent threatened to cut rations to any family caught practicing heathen rituals. It was in this atmosphere that Ayanna went into labor. The missionary doctor was in town, drunk. The agency nurse declared she wouldn't help breed children be born, so the Apache women took over, as they always had. Thomas was banished from the shelter. Men didn't attend births, but he could hear Ayanna's pain, could do nothing but pace and pray to any god that might listen. Joseph sat with him through the long night. "First child is always hardest," he offered. "My wife, she labored 2 days with our son." It was the first time Joseph had mentioned his own family, killed in the violence that took Ayanna's husband. Thomas understood it as the gift of connection it was. Near dawn, a new sound split the air, the cry of an infant, strong and clear. The women emerged, smiling tiredly. Ayanna's aunt beckoned Thomas inside. Ayanna lay exhausted but radiant, holding a bundle of blankets. When Thomas knelt beside her, she pulled back the wrapping to reveal their child, a daughter, perfect and small, with Ayanna's dark hair and, surprisingly, Thomas's blue eyes. "She is bridge between worlds," Ayanna whispered. "What shall we name her?" Thomas thought of all they'd been through, all the boundaries crossed and prices paid. "Hope," he said finally, in Apache. "How do you say hope?" "Gaju," Ayanna smiled. "Little Gaju, Hope Granger." Looking at his daughter, Thomas felt something fundamental shift. He'd thought he understood what he'd chosen when he followed Ayanna, but holding this tiny life, knowing the challenges she'd face, the worlds she'd have to navigate, he understood truly. This wasn't about his love for Ayanna anymore. This was about creating a future where children like Hope could exist without apology. The naming ceremony was held in secret, the old ways preserved despite prohibition. Thomas participated fully, no longer an outsider, but a father presenting his child to the community. Even Joseph smiled when Hope grabbed his finger with her tiny hand. That night, as his wife and daughter slept, Thomas sat outside their shelter, keeping watch. The stars were different here than in New Mexico, but they were still stars. Somewhere, those same lights shone on his old ranch, on the life he'd left behind. He felt no regret. That life had been comfortable but empty. This life was hard beyond imagining, but full of purpose. Every small victory, a child fed, a tradition preserved, a moment of joy carved from sorrow, meant more than all his former prosperity. A figure approached in the darkness. Thomas tensed, then relaxed as he recognized the elderly uncle who'd married them. "Cannot sleep?" the old man asked, settling beside him with careful movements. "Too much to think about." "Ah, new fathers always think too much." He pulled out his pipe. "I will tell you secret. Children don't need perfect world. Need parents who show them how to live in imperfect one. And if I don't know how to do that, then you learn, like you learn everything else. Slowly, painfully, but with love." He smoked in silence for a moment. "You have given up much, Thomas Granger, but you have gained a place in the great story. Your daughter, her children, their children. They will know their father chose love over comfort, family over fortune. Will it be enough? To help them survive what's coming?" The old man shrugged. "Who can say? But survival is not only about living, also about keeping alive what matters. Language, ceremony, connection to land even when land is taken. You help us remember we are more than what they try to make us. That is not nothing." As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky in pastels, Hope woke and cried. Thomas went inside to find Ayanna nursing their daughter, humming an old Apache lullaby. He sat beside them, his family, his choice made flesh. "Sing with me," Ayanna said softly. She should know both voices. So Thomas added his voice to hers. Rough and uncertain, but full of love. Their daughter settled, blue eyes focusing on their faces with that profound attention of the very young. Outside, the reservation woke to another day of struggle and small resistance. But inside their shelter, a white man and an Apache woman sang to their mixed-blood daughter, creating harmony from histories that should have kept them apart. It wasn't the life either had planned. But as Thomas watched the sunrise paint his daughter's face gold, he knew it was the only life he wanted. Here in this place of exile and endurance, they'd found something the comfortable world would never understand. The fierce joy of choosing love when love costs everything. Hope yawned, tiny fist waving in the air like a flag of defiance. Thomas caught it gently, marveling at the strength in those small fingers. She would need that strength, but she would have something else too. Parents who'd proven that bridges between worlds were possible, even if they had to be built one painful plank at a time. The sun climbed higher, and the day's challenges waited. But for now, in this moment, they were simply family, and in a world determined to divide them, that was its own revolution. The years flowed like water through cupped hands, precious and impossible to hold. Hope grew from a tiny bundle into a curious child who ran barefoot through the reservation, speaking Apache with her mother's family and English with her father's careful accent. At 5, she was a bridge made flesh. Copper skin and blue eyes, Apache prayers and frontier lullabies, belonging fully to both worlds and neither. Thomas had learned the rhythms of reservation life. The lean months when rations ran short. The small victories when a hidden garden produced squash. The constant dance between survival and resistance. His hands, once soft from ledger work, were now calloused from building shelters. Mending what could be mended, making something from nothing. The community they'd built grew slowly. Other displaced souls found their way to them. A Mexican family fled from Texas violence. A freed slave couple with nowhere else to go. White missionaries who'd lost faith in conversion, but not in service. Together they created something new, not Apache, not white, but human. "You've done something remarkable here," said Sarah Morrison, a Quaker woman who'd brought medical supplies from Philadelphia. She watched children of all colors playing together, their laughter rising like smoke signals of hope. "This could be a model for—" "It's not a model," Thomas interrupted gently. "It's just life. People choosing to see each other as family despite what the world says." But the world had opinions about such choices. Letters from government officials questioned the irregular settlement. Traditionalists on both sides muttered about dilution and contamination. Yet the small community persisted, held together by shared struggle and the stubborn insistence that love mattered more than blood. It was autumn when everything changed. Hope was playing with the other children when riders approached. Not the usual agency police, but territorial marshals. Thomas felt his blood chill as he recognized Charlie Morrison among them, the man Ayanna had cut years ago, now wearing a badge. "Thomas Granger," Morrison called out, his scarred arm testament to old grievances. "You're under arrest." "On what charge?" "Harboring fugitives, illegal trading, violation of the Indian Appropriation Act." Morrison smiled coldly. "Take your pick. You've been living illegal for years. Breed lover. Time to pay up." Ayanna emerged from their shelter, hope clinging to her skirts. The little girl's blue eyes were wide with fear she didn't understand. "Papa?" Hope's voice was small. "Where are they taking you?" Thomas knelt, pulling his daughter close. "Just for a little while. Little one, be brave for Mama." "No." Ayanna stepped forward, but Joseph Crowfeather caught her arm. "You fight now. They kill him." Joseph said quietly, "Better he goes alive." The trial was a foregone conclusion. Thomas sat in the territorial courthouse, watching justice pretend to be blind while peering through fingers. His lawyer, a young man who'd taken the case for notoriety, did his best. "Mr. Granger legally married this woman according to Apache custom. Apache custom holds no legal weight." The judge interrupted. "Next argument. The supplies he procured were for humanitarian purposes. Unauthorized trade with reservation Indians is illegal regardless of purpose." Thomas barely listened. Through the window, he could see the gallows where men hung for lesser crimes than loving across racial lines. He thought of Hope, of Ayanna, of the community they'd built. Whatever happened to him, they would endure. The sentence, when it came, was almost merciful. 5 years imprisonment, confiscation of remaining assets. Thomas suspected his former status as a landowner was all that saved him from worse. As they led him away, he heard commotion in the gallery. Ayanna's voice raised in Apache. cursing the court with ancient words. Prison was its own reservation. Walls instead of boundaries. Chains instead of regulations. Thomas worked in the laundry, his hands raw from lye soap, his back bent from labor. But he'd learned endurance on the reservation. Stone walls couldn't break what winter starvation hadn't. Letters were rare, heavily censored. But Jake, bless him, found ways to send news. The ranch survived, smaller but intact. He was setting aside money for when Thomas got out. The old foreman never mentioned Ayanna or Hope directly. Such letters would never get through, but always ended with, "Your family is remembered." It was Sarah Morrison, the Quaker woman, who brought real news. Using her religious credentials, she gained permission for monthly visits. "They're well," she told him during one visit. "Your daughter is brilliant, reads everything she can find. Ayanna teaches her the old ways in secret. The community struggles, but survives." "Tell them—" Thomas stopped. What message could capture everything he felt? "I'll tell them you love them," Sarah said simply. That's all that needs saying. 3 years into his sentence, things changed. A new reformer president appointed commissioners to investigate reservation conditions. Sarah Morrison testified. Letters Thomas had written years earlier surfaced in Eastern newspapers. Public opinion, fickle as prairie wind, began to shift. "You're being released," the warden informed him one morning. "Sentence commuted for time served. Seems you've got friends in high places now." Thomas walked out of prison on a spring morning. 5 years after entering, Jake was waiting with horses and news. The reservation boundaries had been relaxed. Mixed families were being grudgingly acknowledged. It wasn't victory, but it was movement. The journey back felt endless. Every mile brought memories. Here where he'd first seen Ayanna dance. There where they'd sheltered from the storm. The landscape had changed. Settlements sprawling where open range once ran. But the bones of the land remained. He reached the reservation at sunset. The community had grown. More shelters, gardens, even a small schoolhouse where children learned both ways of knowing. But Thomas had eyes only for the 2 figures standing at the edge of the settlement. Hope had grown tall, coltish with approaching adolescence. Her face was Ayanna's in miniature, but those blue eyes were pure Granger stubbornness. She stood uncertain. This father more memory than man. "Hope," Thomas said, his voice rough with emotion. She flew to him then. All hesitation vanished, and he caught her up, though she was really too big for carrying. "Papa, Mama said you'd come back. She said you always come back." Over Hope's shoulder, Thomas met Ayanna's eyes. She'd aged, lines around her eyes, silver threading through her black hair. But she was still the woman who'd danced alone in Moonlight, who'd taught him that love was worth any price. "You came back," she said simply. "Always." Thomas replied, "Always." That night, the community celebrated quietly. Drums low so the agency wouldn't complain. Voices soft but joyful. Thomas sat with his family, relearning them. Hope chattered about everything, her studies, her friends, the horse Joseph was teaching her to train. Ayanna was quieter, but her hand never left his. Later, alone in their shelter, they came together with desperate tenderness. 5 years of separation melted in the heat between them. Afterward, they lay entwined, catching up on lost time with touches as much as words. "I thought you might not come back," Ayanna admitted in the darkness. "Not because you didn't want to, but because the world would make it too hard. The world's been trying to keep us apart since the beginning." Thomas said, "Hasn't worked yet." She was quiet for a moment. "There's something else. The government. They want to divide the reservation. Give allotments to individuals. Sell the rest. They say families like ours, mixed families, might have preference for good land." Thomas felt the old anger rise. Another trick, another way to divide and conquer. But maybe. What does the council say? They're divided. Some see opportunity. Others see another theft. She turned in his arms. "What do you think?" "I think we take what we can get and make it work. Like we always have." He kissed her forehead. We'll need land if Hope is to have any future. And the others, our community. They'll need advocates who understand both systems. The next years were a blur of bureaucracy and building. Thomas used his literacy and knowledge of white systems to help families navigate the allotment process. Not all outcomes were fair, they never were. But some families got decent land, enough to build on. Their own allotment was on marginal ground, but it had water access and decent soil. Thomas built a proper house, not grand like his old ranch, but solid. Adobe walls that kept cool in summer, warm in winter, a porch where Ayanna could work her loom, a room where Hope could study. The school came next, not a government school designed to kill the Indian in the child, but something new. Sarah Morrison helped secure funding from progressive Eastern churches, teachers who believed in both worlds, Apache instructors in the morning, English and mathematics in the afternoon, traditional knowledge preserved alongside preparation for a changing world. It's not enough, Joseph Crowfeather said one evening as they watched children release from classes, their laughter mixing languages. They still take our sacred sites, still forbid our ceremonies. No, it's not enough. Thomas agreed. But it's more than we had. And these children, they'll know who they are. That's how we win, not all at once, but generation by generation. The years rolled on. Hope grew into a young woman of fierce intelligence and bridging grace. She won a scholarship to a teacher's college back east, the first from their reservation to do so. The night before she left, she found Thomas on the porch, watching stars. "I'm scared, Papa," she admitted, sitting beside him. "What if I don't belong there either?" Thomas thought carefully before answering. "You know what your mother told me once. We belong to ourselves. You're not going there to fit in. Hope, you're going to learn what you need to bring back here, to make sure children like you have easier paths. Is that why you gave up everything? For easier paths? I gave up everything for love." Thomas said simply, "The easier paths, if they come, that's just bonus." Hope left the next morning, tall and proud on the wagon to the train station. Ayanna cried after, but they were proud tears. Their daughter would walk in both worlds with her head high. More years passed. The old uncle who'd married them passed on, but not before seeing great-grandchildren born. Joseph Crowfeather became a tribal judge, working within the system to protect what could be protected. Sarah Morrison established a permanent clinic, training Apache healers in Western medicine and vice versa. And through it all, Thomas and Ayanna endured. Their love, tested by every force the world could muster, had seasoned into something unbreakable. They danced still, on quiet nights when the moon was full, no longer dances of grief but of gratitude, for survival, for each other, for the bridge they'd built with their bodies and choices. One evening, as autumn painted the sky in shades of memory, they sat on their porch. The reservation had changed. More roads, electric lines starting to appear, the modern world creeping in. But children still played in mixed groups. Families still gathered for hidden ceremonies. The old ways bent, but didn't break. "Do you ever regret it?" Ayanna asked suddenly. "The life you could have had." Thomas looked at her, this woman who'd cost him everything and given him more. Her hair was more silver than black now, her hands weathered from work, but she was still the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "How can I regret the only real choice I ever made?" He took her hand, feeling the calluses that matched his own. "I was sleepwalking through life until I saw you dance. Everything since has been waking up." She leaned against his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set on another day of imperfect victory. In the distance, drums began. Someone celebrating a birth, a return, a small triumph over large odds. Hope would be home soon for winter break, bringing stories of the wider world and plans for change. The clinic was expanding. The school had a waiting list. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. As stars began to appear, Ayanna stood and extended her hand. "Dance with me." Thomas rose, taking her in his arms. They moved together on the porch they'd built, to music only they could hear. The rhythm of two hearts that had chosen each other despite everything. In the house, Photographs told their story. A white rancher and an Apache widow. Their blue-eyed daughter. A community of bridge builders. But the real story was in this moment. Two people dancing in defiance of a world that would keep them apart. Proving with every step that love was stronger than law, deeper than division. They danced as they had lived, imperfectly but together. And in that imperfect dance lay more beauty than all the careful steps of propriety could ever contain. The moon rose full and bright, blessing their movement with a silver light. Somewhere in the night, coyotes sang their ancient songs, and on a porch in Oklahoma, far from where their story began, Thomas Granger and Ayanna danced on, testimony to the power of choosing love when love costs everything. They had lost their separate worlds, but found something better, a shared life built on the radical act of seeing each other as human. First, last, always. The dance continued, would always continue, in the children they'd raised, the communities they'd built, the small daily choices to reach across divide. Two old lovers swaying in moonlight. Proof that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply to love without permission and refuse to let go. Thank you for listening to this story of love and courage in the Old West. If you enjoyed this tale of Thomas and Ayanna, please let us know where you're listening from in the comments below. Subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more stories that explore the untold romances and forgotten heroes of America's frontier. Share your thoughts on this story. What touched your heart? What would you have done in Thomas's place? Your comments help us build a community of story lovers from around the world.